So welcome everybody who's just coming in. I went ahead and got started. I had no idea there was going to be a flood as soon as I did that. But I'm Beth Carroll and we're rolling because I've got a lot to cover. All right, so quick introduction to me. That's me. I'm the managing principal of Prosperio Group. We're a compensation consulting firm. I've actually been started with sales compensation plans. So I did that for 10 years. And then I started my own company at the beginning of 2008. And through just a series of very fortunate events, I ended up working with a lot of transportation and logistics companies. So initially it was with a lot of freight brokers. So do any of you guys have freight brokerages that are attached to your organization? Some might. So one of my biggest clients is McLean Food Service, and they actually have a freight broker attached to their organization. So I thought it might be some possibility there. But through the work that I had done, originally starting out with freight brokers, it became for-hire trucking companies. And then that became private fleet drivers. And then that became warehouse, right? So it's been sort of this evolution that I have gone through. My core knowledge, my core base of understanding is thinking about incentive compensation through the lens of a salesperson, okay? So that's where I start. That's everything that I think of comes through that terminology and that framework. But I have found that it actually applies quite well to the roles that we're talking about here. It's very different when you're talking about drivers and you're talking about warehouse workers, which I think is most of what you guys are involved with. Is there anybody in here that would actually be involved with the sales force at all? Okay, we got a couple. Okay, good. So I can talk more specifically about sales compensation if that's of interest to you. But I was thinking probably most of the interest here would be driver pay. How many of you involved at all tangentially in driver pay? Okay, and warehouse worker pay, so forklift operators, selectors, case pickers, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So I'm going to be focusing more on that side of the house, but if you want me to talk about sales comp, I could do that for hours on end, okay? So this breaks down the clients that I've worked with. I've worked with 223 different companies, and you can see 171 of them are what I would call transportation, logistics, supply chain, something like that. So that's become a real expertise of mine. As far as I know, I'm the only person that has that focus. All right, in terms of the companies that I've worked with, a lot on here, I highlighted the ones that I think are going to be most relevant for you guys. So I didn't actually call anything distribution. I probably should have for this conference. I have them broken down into food and beverage and then private fleets. Some of those private fleets obviously have nothing to do with food distribution. But it's interesting because those are competitors for your labor pool, right? So you need to keep them in mind as well. So what East Penn, which is a battery company, I don't know if any of you are familiar with East Penn, what they're doing with their driver pay is going to affect how you have to pay your drivers, even though what they're delivering is something entirely different. The mechanics of actually doing the delivery are very similar, right? So it's in a lot of cases rolling a hand truck or doing a lift gate or something along those lines. So a driver who's considering working with one of your companies would also be considering working with a company like East Penn. So it's really important to keep that labor market in mind as well. A little bit less relevant, I would say, would be the for-hire work that I've done. So with companies like LTL carriers or like Conway before they got acquired by XPO, truckload carriers, they operate in a very different space than you guys, and they typically cannot touch this industry in terms of the amount of pay that is being paid to drivers. They don't have the margins to be able to pull it off. So the ATA, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the ATA, American Trucking Association. They publish a compensation survey every year. And last time they did it, every 3 years. Last time they did it, they had their median pay for over-the-road drivers at $55,000 a year, okay? I would guess, I don't know all the companies that are represented here, but I would guess that is far lower than what you guys are typically paying your drivers, okay? What I see mostly in this kind of world where it's more private fleet, distribution kind of thing is going to be into the 70s, maybe even to the 80s or 90s, depending on what's going on. So that's an interesting context to keep in mind there. We do compensation surveys as well, so that's part of how I have that knowledge in terms of how companies pay their workers. I run surveys that focus on these roles to try to gather that information. The IT group is probably going to get this. If any of you in IT are involved in calculating driver incentive pay, you'll know what a horrific task that is to try to actually gather compensation data for drivers, because within a single company, there's not a standard methodology. I would love to know it. Do any of you, if you're aware of it, do any of you have a standard methodology for how you pay your drivers that is the same across every single DC you have? And you must have more than one DC before you can answer that question. Anybody have complete consistency? Hourly pay. Okay, yeah, you've got hourly pay. But anybody who's doing, so that brings up a good point. How many other people are doing hourly pay? Just hourly pay, nothing else. Okay, we've got a couple. So the others are doing something along the lines of maybe hours, miles, containers, stops, backhaul, per diem. What do you have?
Peak miles, stop.
What, peak?
Cases.
Pieces, yes. That's one of those things that there's all kinds of, whether it's containers, cases, pieces. What about revenue or weight? That would be another thing. Anybody do revenue or weight in here? No? So there's still some out there. I know there's some DCs that are still sort of lingering around the weight thing, but that makes it very hard in terms of what's being delivered, because the drivers have actually very little control over what they're delivering. So that's going to determine how much money they